Soviet B-59, and so we had as many naval assets surrounding Cuba as we did at the blockade line, and we had aircraft in the air all the time, both at the periphery of Cuba and out over the sea towards the blockade line. And I don't know if it was aircraft or ships that located B-59, but we soon found it, and of course it would have dived just like a U-boat would. And we had told the Soviets, hey, we're going to drop practice depth charges, means we know you're there. That means you better identify yourself and come to the surface. Now, whether that message got to the commander of B-59 or not, we don't know. But he has the experience of one depth charge after another rattling the ship. And later, the Soviets permitted his men to talk. This is many years later. And one of them described it like being in a steel drum being hit by a sledgehammer. So their nerves are rattled. The conditions on board were terrible, by the way. At this point, they'd run low on water, so they're allowed 1 glass of water per day. Carbon dioxide's building in the sub, so they can't wait to get to the surface to get some air. And they're being surrounded and depth charged. So this commander is getting so frazzled that he finally goes, put the special torpedo, he says this to whoever, the second in command is, in firing tube number 3. And it turned out the special torpedo has a nuclear tip. And this commander, his name was Savitsky. And then he calls the senior men of this sub together and he says, and he doesn't say it like I'm saying, he must have shouted it, we're all going to die, but we're going to take them with us. We have the special torpedo and we're going to let it go because he knows he's surrounded. And he's ready to start nuclear war. And his instructions are not allowing him to do that unless World War III has started. But he thinks World War III has started because what are all these depth charges? And it's just luck that he doesn't fire it. And the luck is on board his sub of equal command, but not in command of the sub, is another Soviet commander, and his name is Sergei Arkhipov. This is him. And he's got a little more level head, and he says, no, our instructions are not to fire any torpedoes, let alone the nuclear torpedo, unless we've been told and given the okay. And we don't have that. And he's able to talk this guy down off the ledge, but he was ready to vaporize a whole aircraft carrier, which would have started nuclear war. So when you think about it, it's exactly what Kennedy and Khrushchev were afraid of. Some miscommunication, some screw up is going to lead us down the path. And that's the thing that we're always going to have to be wary of. So the sub eventually did surface, and sure enough it was surrounded by ships, and it turned back. But there's more bad news happening, and one involves Chuck Maltzby. Now, he was the pilot who I said was stationed in Alaska. And he's told, no connection to Cuba, but he's told, fly from Eisen Air Force Base over the North Pole and collect radioactive samplings. And that's kind of routine to monitor what the Soviets are doing. And he said it's going to be a nighttime flight, and that means you're going to have to fly by celestial navigation, because there's no land mass up when you get over the frozen tundra and the ice. There's no rivers, there's no radio towers. So he's going to have to go by the stars. And it's going to be a long flight. It's going to be a good 7-hour flight. So he gets, everything goes good. He gets over, pretty much over the North Pole. And guess what messes him up? The Northern Lights. Apparently the planners didn't think of this, but they should have. So there, again, you could plan and plan and plan, but plans go out the window sometimes, and he gets lost. And he can't get any kind of radio signal. On this map, he's left from Eisen Air Force Base and gone over Barter Island. That's his last radio beacon. But he's well up over the frozen ice, and he's lost. And he said, I knew I was in trouble when I was fiddling with my frequencies on the radio and I picked up Russian music. And the Russians knew he was coming into Russian airspace, and he did. He entered Russian airspace. And they don't know what's happening. Is this the start of World War III? Is the U.S. doing an attack and this is the vanguard? So they send up MiGs to bring him down, and normally a MiG couldn't bring him down, but he's got another issue. His fuel gauge is on empty. And he's got a big decision, and his decision finally is, I am not going to be shot down. I am not going to be taken POW again. So he decides to take the risky maneuver of shutting down the entire aircraft, all power systems off, engine off, everything off, which means he's going to lose cabin air pressure, which means that pressure suit better damn work. When he does it, sure enough, the pressure suit works, but his whole helmet ices up and fogs up, and he can barely see. So he's trying to get out of Russian airspace. The MiGs are coming up, and I don't want to give away the book of what happens next, so I'll leave you in suspense on that. The museum has a whole bunch of copies for you. But I will say this, we knew he was in trouble, so we launched 4 jets, and their normal air-to-air missiles had been taken off and replaced with nuclear-tipped missiles. So it's like a James Bond scene that has not been reported by and large of what happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis over Soviet airspace. And it's exactly what Kennedy feared, a total screw-up and miscommunications. Now, Major Rudy Anderson's back in Florida, and this is weird. At the same moment Chuck Maltby's in trouble, Rudy launches. And he volunteered for this mission, by the way. He didn't have to go. It could have been one of the other people in order. But again, probably being a pacifist and wanting to be known as one of the better reconnaissance pilots, he volunteers. And they send him on a flight path very similar to Jerry's. But Jerry recently told me, I didn't know this when I wrote the book, so it's not in there. Jerry said, the only difference was that Rudy was coming in over Banyas. He said, I came in over Havana and did the length of the island. He's coming in over the, let's see, that'd be the eastern end, and going to do the length in the opposite direction. And he's in it's a CIA U-2, but it's painted with U.S. Air Force, because Kennedy didn't want any CIA pilots or any CIA markings or anything like that, I think because of the Bay of Pigs. CIA was not happy about that because they felt some of their pilots were better than the Air Force pilots. But Kennedy said, no, only Air Force pilots. And so Rudy, Steve Heiser, Jerry McElmoyle were the best of the best, and that's why they were selected. So Banyas is down by Guantanamo Bay, and the Russians are tracking him. We knew all along that the Russian radar could pick up U-2s. We also knew the MiGs couldn't reach him. And there's 2 Russian generals on the ground, and they decide that we should take this U-2 out. But they don't have authorization to do that. And they didn't have it when they shot at Jerry either. No one's ever owned up to who shot at Jerry. But these 2 Russian generals, they try to get permission from the supreme commander of the Soviet forces in Cuba. And they can't reach him. He was very ill. They couldn't get him. And so they decide, well, World War III is imminent. All the intelligence is the U.S. invasion is going to happen any hour, and it was. So they decide that gives us the latitude to destroy, and they labeled Rudy's aircraft target number 33. So they radio Banyas, surface air missile sites, and that's what they say, destroy target 33. And sure enough, they launch the SAM. Now, I'm speculating here, but it's based on some research. I don't think the SAM made a direct hit. I think what happened, it was close enough that shrapnel hit the aircraft. And all it would take is one piece. These U-2s are so flimsy, one piece would probably mess it up enough for it to start coming down. And then I said to Jerry, so if this U-2 was hit, it would have to fall 13 miles. Wouldn't it be in pieces on the ground? And he said, yeah, if it was a direct hit. And I said, well, Jerry, I've got the photo of it on the ground, and it's not in pieces as big as my hand. The fuselage is intact, and Rudy's dead in the cockpit. And Jerry goes, I know, I think that's because it was wounded. And he said, a U-2 that's wounded, and these are his words, he said, it comes down like a leaf from a tree, just kind of spiraling down. And he said, first it's going to lose its tail, then it will lose one wing and then the other. And he said, we're pretty sure that's what happened in this case. And we know this too, that one little piece of shrapnel penetrated Rudy's pressure suit. So that explains why he never tried to eject and never put out a mayday. Probably was killed within 60 seconds of the SAM exploding. And we knew about this, by the way, right away, because Radio Havana was celebrating. We downed a U-2. They were taking full credit for firing the SAMs, but the Cubans were never allowed to man the surface-to-air missiles. It was the Russians. But yet, even though we knew right away, and we had other means to know that he was shot down, nobody tells Kennedy. And so you read in the book that he's at this meeting and it's droning on, and then somebody in an offhand manner goes, we lost a U-2 today. And Bobby goes, what? And they go, we lost a U-2. And Bobby goes, is the pilot dead? And they go, yes, we're certain he's been killed. And then Kennedy just goes, well, this is a whole new ball game. And it's just odd how they wait so long to tell him, and then they tell him in this offhand manner. I don't have the answer. I don't know why. But LeMay is ready to go now. He's been promised, you take down a U-2, I can take out the surface-to-air missile sites. The planes are gassed and ready to go at Key West. But Kennedy goes, no, not yet. And he's furious. Behind Kennedy's back, he goes, what a chicken. He goes, we lost a pilot, and he's still too afraid to do anything. But what Kennedy wants to do is, he thinks we're just hours away from all-out war. So he pulls Bobby aside. He said, this is our last chance. Go to the Soviet foreign minister and tell him, here's the final deal. We will, at some point in the future, take our missiles out of Turkey. And he uses the word soon. And we're going to do that, but you can't announce that. That's going to be just our gentleman's agreement. And we will promise not to invade Cuba if you withdraw all your offensive weapons out of Cuba. And the Soviet minister cables that to Khrushchev, and Sergei said, as soon as my father got that cable, he agreed to it. And he didn't even want to wait for the time of cabling back. He went right on the radio and said, a deal has been reached, we're ending this peacefully, the U.S. promises not to invade Cuba, so we're going to remove our missiles. And he kept his word about not saying anything of missiles. LeMay was not too happy, you know. His viewpoint was, sooner or later we're going to have to fight the Russians, and now's the time where we're superior in strength. That was his mindset. But what he wasn't doing, he was never calculating in the nuclear war aspect to all this. And Kennedy was, because he would talk to various advisors after the meetings about the millions of innocent people that might be killed. And Jackie, she wouldn't even leave the White House. She kept being encouraged, take the kids to Mount Weather. That's where the cave is outside of D.C. And she wouldn't leave. She said, we're going to go here at the White House with Jack. So Kennedy addresses the nation, but he tells his, you know, all the political people and the advisors, no gloating. Because the missiles aren't out of there yet, the Russians could change their mind. So no gloating, just say it kind of matter of fact, and we're not saying anything about the missiles coming out of Turkey. That must have been for political reasons. He didn't want to be seen as weak, so he wanted that kept under the table. Rudy's body was returned 3 weeks later, so that's why Jerry knew about the one piece of shrapnel hitting the pressure suit. Really tough on Rudy's wife. You read in the book a number of things that happened to her, but one was, and this is really surreal, a year before this crisis, she gets a knock on the door, and it's the Air Force chaplain, a couple brass with her, and they say, sorry to inform you, your husband's been killed in a training accident. And they went to the wrong house. It wasn't It was a total mess up. So now, when he really is killed and she gets the knock on the door, she doesn't know what to believe and just goes through hell. Kennedy, I thought he did a classy thing, you know, despite all the pressure and things in front of him. He right away, you know, within a 2-week period, I think, he flew down to Homestead Air Force Base to thank the Crusader and the U-2 pilots in person. So Jerry's all excited. Jerry's like, I'm going to get to meet the president. And they tell him, no, you're a low man on totem pole. You have to stay with the U-2 in the hangar in case a member of the president's entourage wants to see what a U-2 looks like. And Jerry's like, oh, great. So he says, after Kennedy speaks, he's stuck in the hangar. He says, you wouldn't believe it. In comes the limousine. And he said 2 or 3 limousines come right into the hangar. And he says he sees the president get out. His whole entourage gets out. And he hears the president go, you all stay there. I want to talk to that young man alone. And so we ended the book with that private conversation between Kennedy up on the steps at the cockpit of the U-2 and Jerry. And it went on for a good 25 minutes. They had this private conversation. And so we dedicated the book to the Rudy Anderson, who I never knew that we lost a pilot during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it's just, I don't know why everybody knows about Gary Powers and nobody knows about Rudy Anderson, and he gave his life protecting all of us. And it showed there's another way to serve the country as well. You know, his pacifist nature, but yet he was still serving the country. Thank you very much.